What if the gods of ancient Babylon were not myths, but fallen angels? You know the Bible story of Daniel, a faith empires cannot break, but you've never experienced it like this. The Daniel Trilogy by best-selling author Brian Godawa, part of the Chronicles of the Watchers, a series of supernatural biblical novels charting the influence of spiritual warfare on human history. Jezebel, Moses, Judah Maccabee, and now the Daniel Trilogy. The first novel, Daniel, Exile in Babylon, available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com. Chronicles of the Watchers by Brian Godawa at Amazon.com.
Welcome to Bible Over Brews, deep thoughts ferment over time and text. I'm coming at you, Aaron Juice Veverka, and I've got Gumby.
Yes, sir, you got me.
And I've got Brian Godawa.
Hey.
Brian Godawa is a respected Christian writer and best-selling author of novels and biblical theology. His first novel series, Chronicles of the Nephilim, has been in the top 10 of biblical fiction on Amazon for more than 10 years, selling over 350,000 books. It's an imaginative retelling of Bible stories of the Nephilim giants, fallen angelic watchers, and spiritual warfare. The sequel series, Chronicles of the Watchers, expands the Nephilim series, while Chronicles of the Apocalypse tells the story of the New Testament book of Revelation. His popular book, Hollywood Worldview, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment, is used as a textbook in Christian film schools around the country. Mr. Godawa is the screenwriter for the classic award-winning feature film To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland. He previously adapted to film the best-selling supernatural thriller novel The Visitation by author Frank Peretti for Ralph Winter. He is no stranger to controversy with his screenplay for Alleged, another award-winning movie about the scandalous Scopes Monkey trial, and My Son Hunter, a scathing satire about Hunter Biden's infamous laptop from hell. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's good to see you, Brian.
I have a question, though. From my perspective, all I see of you guys is the camera's just down the middle of the table and you're both off screen. Is that how it shows to the people or no?
You know what? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I don't usually know until post edits.
Okay, whatever.
And it usually gives me some options to, move things around. So we'll find out in post.
Okay, and then I just have to alert people that I didn't get to eat my dinner tonight, and I've got it really late, so I might be picking on it a little bit here and there as we're talking. I'll try not to be too gross about it, but
no worries, man.
Gotta have some ham, baby, man. I was starving hungry. So, and then while you guys are drinking you guys are drinking your beer, I'm drinking a Maker's Mark.
There you go. That's a little better. I made a slight adjustment right there.
That does work. Now I can't see anything of you guys.
Really?
I mean, yeah, it's just the table.
Huh.
Yeah.
On our side, it actually expanded, and I can see me and Gumby now, and you.
Okay, fair enough.
So odd.
Indeed.
Well, Gumby and I will be starting with Michter's. This is renowned for rye, America's oldest whiskey variety since the earliest days of our history. We take the production of Michter's U.S. Kentucky Straight extremely seriously. Our Michter's is the Kentucky Straight rye made from select American rye grain that is sheared to maximize the extraction of flavor from the grain. All right. Cheers.
Cheers, fellas. Fellas, happy Easter. Happy Resurrection Day.
Happy Easter. So, there's this new book I hear is coming out. It sounds fascinating, which is Daniel has been a fascination for me because he is so integrated into everything across the New and Old Testament, both. He's like that. He's like that character that bridges gaps. And so I find that character even the triumphal entry was part of his prophecies. So that's definitely a huge topic that I enjoy reading about. So I'm looking forward to this book.
That's great. Yeah. I just released it. It's the first in a trilogy, but people don't worry. You can get this book and it's not going to leave you hanging. There's obviously going to be some things left hanging, but the story is a complete beginning, middle, and end. And my goal here was I realized as I was going to write a novel about Daniel, like I've written about all my characters. I have Jezebel, Moses, right? And and the Moses novel's pretty long, but I realized because of the prophecy as well, Daniel was like, there's so much going on with him that I want to take the time to tell a good story, but it's sort of like his life has different component parts. So the first component, I realized that if I'm going to tell his story, I think one of the most interesting things that I need to address is like his schooling, because, of course we all hear about Daniel's stories, how he won't, he won't compromise, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't either, and they get thrown in the fire and thrown in the lions, right? But imagine this, though: they were deported around 605 BC by Nebuchadnezzar, and they were selected specifically in Daniel. It says, royalty and nobility were specifically selected, the best young men, and without blemish, etc. And they were to be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans, basically to be taught in their school of wise men. That's where we get the term wise men, was from Daniel, or magi. Magi is a later term in the Persian Empire, but it's the same thing. But if you look at the wise men, and even within Daniel, it talks about how they're astrologers, diviners, magicians, sorcerers. And you're like, well, how is it that he can be taught in school for 3 years that stuff and remain true to Yahweh without engaging in that stuff? That's pretty complicated. And I thought, you can't just jump over that. So I decided this first volume was going to be about just those 3 years of Daniel's training. So it turns out to be basically Harry Potter goes to magician school and he meets God. It's that kind of a thing. So that's kind of how I saw it. Of course, it's Harry Potter meets God, but rated, PG-13 for sure, way up there, because it's got my classic violence and spiritual warfare and sins and etc. Yeah,
it makes it saucy, and that's
saucy.
I love it. It's so mixed in. It paints this picture that because I do think one of the things that happen in Christian literature and culture is it's so sanitized, it almost makes it boring. And that's where your novels definitely aren't. There's the feeling of where this could be real life. It's a little more like watching an episode of Vikings,
Yeah, it's more in that line. Of course, I do cut away, but no, I definitely don't. I don't hold back from the sins that are described. And the irony is that this is a time period where, Judah, hundreds of years earlier, the 10 tribes, northern tribes of Israel had disobeyed Yahweh and were taken over into exile by the Assyrians. And they're gone and they're dissolved into Assyria. They're scattered all over, interbred, all that kind of stuff. And so the only ones left are Judah and what I think Benjamin or something, but basically Judah. And so Judah, it's a tribe of Judah that represents all of Israel here. But they too have been engaging in a lot of idolatry. And so, and the prophets, including Jeremiah and Ezekiel, these are exilic prophets as well as Daniel, they describe the spiritual unfaithfulness of Israel towards Yahweh in terms of adultery. And so it's pretty graphic at times if you read Ezekiel chapter 16 or 23, which will be coming in my second Daniel novel.
Nice.
So, but so I'm dealing with that spiritual adultery. Mm-hmm. And as all my novels do, I'm addressing the spiritual world. So therefore I have the various gods of the nations, like the gods of Babylon are the fallen watchers who are masquerading as the gods of Babylon. So you've got Marduk, Nabu, Ishtar, you've got all these gods of Babylon, and there are these fallen angels, and I have their storyline going on as well behind the scenes in the spiritual world that mirrors what's going on in Daniel's world. And we have to realize that, Daniel doesn't, it's kind of funny because Daniel was in Babylon for like 70 years, right? But we don't really hear a lot about his life. We just hear a few high points. And so there's not that much there. I will include all those, what we do know of Daniel, but I'm trying to fill in the in-between with fiction that would be a little bit speculative, but also would be consistent with the Bible. But also I'm showing the spiritual world. And that is necessarily speculative. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but we do get glimpses in Daniel. For example, Daniel 10 is the classic passage where it talks about the spiritual princes of Persia and Greece and Israel. And Michael is called the spiritual prince of Israel. And they just use the word prince, but scholars tell us, it's spiritual. They're spiritual princes, right? But this is where this notion is one of the most explicit in the Bible, that the notion that over earthly authorities such as nations or kings or peoples, particularly the nations biblically, there are principalities or spiritual powers, and they're linked. So that whatever's going on earth is connected to what's going on in heaven. So for instance, if there's a war on earth, there's a war in heaven. And, we get these throughout the Bible, various references to it, but Daniel's really strong in his expression of this. It's kind of funny that I haven't told this story till now. I've already written 16 other novels about it throughout the Bible. But anyway, and the passage in Daniel talks about how the prince of Persia basically was wrestling with Michael and Gabriel. And this is connected to probably what was going on in Israel at the time, which was right around that time was when the ruler of Babylon, it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, this was a later time period in Daniel 10. But it describes how he's, struggling with Israel because Israel wants to rebuild the city and rebuild the temple, but the spiritual leaders of Babylon don't want him to. But then he says, but in a little while, the prince of Greece will come against the prince of Persia. What does that mean, right? Well, the whole point of Daniel, which I will bring on in my storyline, is that Israel is going into exile under Babylon. The temple is going to be destroyed, the city is going to be destroyed, and God's going to punish Israel for her unfaithfulness for 70 years. But God says, look, I'm going to keep Israel under Gentile power all the way until Messiah. And this is where the various kingdoms of Daniel come in. He talks about the statue, and they talk about the beasts from the sea and stuff. And they all represent the four kingdoms in consecutive order from Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar to Medo-Persia to Greece, and then finally to Rome, and then Messiah will come. That's the overall picture of what Daniel is encouraging them, which means Israel, though they'll get back their they'll go back to their land after 70 years, and they'll build the temple, but God's presence has left and won't return until Messiah returns. And so he says, in a very real sense, well, Israel will be under these Gentile powers until Messiah now. And that's 490 years. So that's the big picture of what's going on in Daniel. I don't go into the prophecies yet in this first novel because, like I said, I'm focusing on Daniel's training to become a magi in the first 3 years. So I cover his deportation, and I cover, him and his three Jewish brothers, Hananiah, Azariah, and Meshach, and how they struggle through those issues together. So one of the elements that I do is, we don't know anything about those three brothers. We know that they stood against Nebuchadnezzar. They went into the fire, and they were met by the angel of Yahweh and brought safely through the fire. But we don't know anything about them beyond that. Well, I wanted to bring out their personalities and give them some story that would integrate them into Daniel's story and have it all make sense. So this is really a buddy flick, and how they're getting through this school of magi, learning pagan forbidden practices. How do you do that, right? I mean, how does one do that? And so I wrestled with that issue in the story at the same time that Daniel is torn away from Jerusalem, where he's keep in mind, he's only 16, but he has fallen in love with his servant who is in who is in Jerusalem, and he's been torn from her. So I have a love story there where they are trying to get back together, her to come to him or him to come to her. And so that's kind of the storyline that's going on there while he's learning how about all these Babylonian practices and trying to stay true to Yahweh. Honestly, this is my favorite of all my stories, which is a good sign. Every time I write a novel, I've often felt this is my best novel yet.
Awesome.
But that's a good sign. You want that from an author because you don't want to be bored, and I don't want to be bored. So, but as a matter of fact, my editor, who's a fantastic editor, she told me that this is my best yet that she's ever edited.
Awesome.
And so have my first readers. So I think this is really going to be something to watch and follow, because by the third novel, people's minds are going to be blown. Like, you're going to be like, people are going to be so in love with the first novel, but it's only a simple, it's only a small part of how awesome it's going to become by the third novel. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. But like I said, don't wait till all series are done, because the first novel is a beginning, middle, and end. It shows his deportation, shows him struggling with his beloved in Jerusalem, but then shows how he overcomes it. And by the end of their story, they have victory over the bad guys at that time, the bullies in the school, right? There's, of course, bullies in the school. And so he has victory over it, and he becomes, we already know, according to Daniel, that, he becomes praised by the king himself for being 10 times greater than all his own magicians in his wise men, which, again, how in the world does that take place? And one of the ways I did that was by giving the characters, not just Daniel, who has his own issues that he struggles with, but the characters of Hananiah and Meshach and Azariah. And as one of my Easter eggs that I like to reveal to people, one of them is autistic. And not only does that bring about a difficulty in their ability to, get along in their culture, but actually his autism ends up becoming a blessing by God that's used to solve some amazing problems and issues that normal people would not be able to.
That's really cool.
In a way it's kind of politically correct, but not intentionally. I mean, I'm not a woke person, but but I just love to come up with interesting characters and something different that we haven't seen before. And I was thinking, how can these students learn all these things like, the stars and the constellations? And, keep in mind, astrology is one element, but astrology of the ancient world was not like what we think of it. We think of it as the horoscopes and the zodiac. And that stuff is way later in this, like towards the first century, In this time period, they do believe in astrology as a divination, and it is idolatrous. God condemns it, but there is a lot of reflection of God's glory in the heavens that I bring out in the text that we see through the constellations. That has nothing to do with astrology. It has to do with God's glory and his power. And this is all sort of integrated in a way to show how God transcends these pagan systems and shows his glory in spite of it.
Awesome. It's funny because I was actually reading an article recently about trying to figure out how ancient people understood the same constellations for the same symbols. And so it kind of touches on that, like there's the dog in the sky, but everybody sees it as the dog. Why is that?
Yeah. So I did some research on that, and because of the Star of Bethlehem. So, Star of Bethlehem is always an interesting thing to me. And I found some documentaries by Christians, evangelicals, by the way, just so you know, not liberals or Catholics. No, just kidding. But seriously, these were, in other words, Bible-believing Christians who don't believe in astrology, but they've done enough research to say, you know what? The Star of Bethlehem was not just some supernatural thing. It was a star. And they were following it, and it had to do with astronomical realities that they pinpointed using modern day software, that now that because of our software, we can literally find exactly where the stars were 2,000 years ago or whenever, right? And they've used software to show that to what that star might have been that the Magi were following. Because remember, the Magi in the first century who found Jesus, they were Magi. They were in the Parthian Empire. Well, what were Magi? Magi were of the school of Daniel.
Yes.
So Daniel was 500 years earlier. And remember, Daniel became the chief of all the wise men, and he was there for 70 years. So this guy, and he wrote scripture talking about Messiah. So you've got to realize he had a significant influence on the actual trade of the Magi. So even 500 years later, these Magi, somehow influenced by Daniel, are following the star to find Messiah. And I don't think that the Parthians were necessarily Jews. But my point is, like, well, so why were they influenced? Why? Because they were influenced by Daniel. God placed him there to leave that information for them. But we don't know what the information is because it's not spoken of in Daniel. Daniel has a couple prophecies about Messiah, but nothing about the stars, right? And so I did some research in that and some fascinating information that I'm bringing out where the origins of that came from in Daniel, where it might have come from. This is speculative. That would eventually lead to those Magi later on. And I'm going to write a novel later on about that. But right now I'm just setting it up where the astronomical observations could have become understood by Daniel's own, brothers who were in the school of the Magi, and then they had that influence. So it's an exciting setup for even a future story, but it also at least starts to explain where the information might have come from. I've always wondered where it came from, and we don't know in the Bible. It doesn't say. So this is a speculative retelling of that makes sense with actual astronomical facts that we now know.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's as a hypothesis, I had actually thought that the Magi must have had something left over from Daniel, which is why they would have known. I think I brought that up on one of our Christmas episodes.
Yeah, me too. But I never realized, well, what would be the details? And then looking into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's whole books written about this. And you mentioned the constellations, right? So what we hear of as the zodiac, we automatically think horoscopes, goofy, silly stuff. But horoscopes, like I said, is relatively new. It wasn't as much in the ancient world until like 100 BC. But before that time, the zodiac was simply the word for the constellations. And they gave names to constellations, not because they believed in magic. It was just their way of remembering where the stars were, because the stars were always in the same place, right? And so they started realizing that continuity, and so they started charting it. We're talking thousands of years before the Babylonians recognized this, and they started charting it. And so they have astronomical observations where they realize the regularity, but they also started realizing that it's moving slightly through the sky. And that has to do with, they didn't know it at the time because they didn't know the Earth was the globe, but it has to do with the pole, right? The pole of the Earth.
Yeah, the axis.
It's the axis. Thank you. It's slightly shifting as the Earth is rotating. It's slightly shifting, right? And so therefore the sky slightly shifts. Well, they recognized all that, but they didn't know that the Earth was a globe. But the point is they were recording it all. So they had all the data, is what's really cool. But they would also keep data of, eclipses and everything. Yes, then they started to believe that, the stars had influence on humanity, but it wasn't absolute. It was more like omens, which means beware, the king could die, right? But then they also believed that, well, if we engaged in certain exorcism techniques, we could purge that from the king so he wouldn't die. Or what they did was, and this actually they did, they would say, okay, the stars recognize that a king may die, so we will, they had a king substitution ritual where they would take some poor slob off the streets, some poor person, and they would literally crown him as king, give him the scepter, literally, and then kill him. And then, like this is how brutal they were. And then they would be given back to the king, real king. And then that way it would say, oh, see, that's the omen that isn't settled on them, right? So yeah, there's idolatry in there. But here's the interesting thing. If you look at Job talks about constellations, the Pleiades, Orion, and he calls them the Mazzaroth. And so there was actually a real ancient book in the 1800s, you can get for free on the internet, by a woman, Frances Rowland, I think her name is, and it's called the Mazzaroth. She actually did as much research as she could in that time period to find out what was the names of all these constellations. Were they there along? And like you said, they were pretty consistent over time through Egypt and all the way back, right? So, she believes that Absolutely. They went back to Enoch. However, now there are changes. To be fair, there have been changes, and there's differences of interpretations in Greek versus Babylonian. So there are differences and there are changes over time, but there is a definite consistency, and that's been charted, And so it's really, it's a really fascinating thing. So all that stuff I bring that into the Daniel story to show how can God be glorified without believing in astrology.
Right. Man, fascinating. So you have your heroes, you have your love interest, you have your Draco Malfoy.
Yep.
I'm looking forward because you do a good job of relationship building in your novels. I've really enjoyed that previously. So I imagine there's kind of an angsty relationship sometimes between, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Oh yeah.
Is it, what kind of personalities are we looking at? Are they like,
that's
buddy
good.
buddy?
So Daniel's kind of he's kind of the arrogant one, because remember now, Daniel is in the noble. He's a royal family member. He's in Judah. He's in the palace. I wouldn't say he was necessarily in line to be king, but he's of the royal family.
Yeah.
And so he has aspirations of royalty, and like, hey, maybe one day if enough people die, I might become king, So he kind of has his own aspirations of like, I want to be important and significant for God, right?
Yeah.
But we all know that just because you want to do it for God doesn't mean it's not going to be good. So he has his journey of discovering that reality. He's fallen in love with his servant. And she's like, why does God care about the little people? You know what I mean? And Daniel's all about God moving kings and kingdoms, right? But does God care about the little people? And honestly, I use my books to wrestle through issues that I struggle with. And that's one of them. It's like, yeah, I believe God cares about kingdoms and nations and history, but what about the little people who live and die and don't have meaning in their life, So she struggles with that. And then his three brothers, Mishael is actually a jock. So he's actually has a hard time. They're all, noble families. So they're all studying to be scribes in Babylon before they're taken, right? But Mishael's been having trouble as a scribe because he's more athletic, right? And he's the muscle of the group, right? And then Hananiah is autistic, and but he knows scripture like the back, he quotes scripture all the time, right? And his brother is Azariah, who's very protective of Hananiah, right? So, and Azariah has his own sort of proud condescension towards the non-noble people. So they have, because they're in the noble class and the royal class, they have to overcome these elitist mentalities, and that's that's one thing that's always intrigued me, is the world of the elitist and how they need to be humbled before God, as do we all, right? But I mean,
absolutely.
Aren't we all elitist in our heart? If we had the power, if we had the money, we would be just like them. And so we have the pride in ourselves. So that's a strong issue that goes throughout, a theme that goes throughout the whole story, is pride and how it manifests in our lives, and how we have to be humbled by God.
Yeah. Pride before the fall, right?
So
absolutely.
In regards to Daniel's training, like at very early on in his training, what qualities did he have that made him even be accepted into the school? Like, what was his gift?
Well,
like, why would they let him in?
I apologize when I cough because I've been sick.
Oh, no worries.
And I'm at that point where I'm overcome. I'm on the back end of my sickness, but you start coughing a lot. That's a good question. This is where I draw from some of the apocryphal material. Maybe I need a little water.
Okay.
A little tea.
Oh, the apocrypha.
And I like to draw, as people know my stories, I like to draw from ancient Jewish traditions, from Christian traditions. Sometimes that includes pseudepigrapha. Sometimes that includes the apocrypha. These are all texts that are not necessarily pretending to be scripture. Some people do believe the apocrypha are, but pseudepigrapha don't. They're just texts that the Jews of the ancient days would retell Bible stories and try to make them, relevant to their own time period. It was their literature, so they would, just like we retell stories today, right? And so they weren't. What's that?
Fan fiction.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, literally, that is absolutely it. Fan fiction for sure. And So I like to draw from those traditions. I'm not very original. I like to draw from those and incorporate them. So by reading my stories, you are getting a kind of a sense of drawing from traditions as well, what the traditions believe. So there's a few traditions of Daniel that are in the Septuagint or the Apocrypha that are not in the Protestant Bibles. Now, the Catholic Bibles have it, but the Protestant Bibles do not. And there's a couple stories that they call Bel and the Dragon, and
Great
another
one.
and another one called Susanna. Well, I draw from Bel and the Dragon, and if you're familiar with that story, you're going to really love this, because not only do I incorporate that story into my Daniel story, but it becomes a key plot point that is that like saves the day at the end. That's really cool. So, and that story is basically a story that where Daniel. Now, I think these stories tend to reflect the Hellenistic time period where Jews were really sort of shall we say, they valued reason. And so they tended to try to say, yeah, well, our heroes were very rational too, and they were really smart. And so they crafted a story where Daniel goes into this, into the sanctuary of Marduk, and he meets the king. The king's there, and the king explains to him, he's with other students, and he explains to them, yeah, this is where we leave the sacrifices for Marduk, and then he eats overnight. He eats the sacrifices. We come back and they're gone, right? And Daniel sort of says, well, the priests in our temple are the ones who eat the sacrifices. There's no pretense. He goes, statues don't eat, king, And they're like, whoa, you don't challenge the king here, right? So the king goes, no, this is interesting. I like this. Let's see if we can teach this young Jew a lesson, And so he says, why don't we leave the food out? And Daniel goes, yeah, let's leave the food out, and we'll lock the doors, put the king's seal on it, and see what happens in the morning. But I just ask one thing, king, and that is, I ask that me and my fellow Jews would be the last ones in the sanctuary. And he lays out a thin film of ash all over the floors. And the reason why he does that is so he could see footprints. And so when they come back in the morning, they find the footprints and they lead to a secret door. And so basically he uses his rationality to show how the priests were basically deceiving people, right? And so this is a very Hellenistic worldview, using your reason to discredit the gods, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I incorporate that, and I use that as part of Daniel's own personality, that Daniel is a very smart, a brilliant young lad, and he uses his reason, and maybe he relies on his reason a little bit too much, because he's the one who has to learn ultimately that he has to trust in God, not his own reason, because at some point in the future, he's not going to be able to know what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed. God's going to have to tell him. And by the way, though, he's being taught dream interpretation in the school. And the essence of the dream interpretation is, tell us what your dream is. We go to our books, and our books tell us, well, if he dreams a frog, this is what it means. If he dreams the frog jumps, this is what it means, right? And some of it's really silly and some of it's, goofy, but the point there is that, some of their learning is very bookish, but Daniel ends up having to trust that God will show him the meanings of dreams, not his teaching, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the journey that Daniel has to go through.
Yeah, so you've got the actual prophet from God, and then you have a bunch of little Freuds.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm going to introduce our next drink real quick, and then I have a couple questions. All right, our next one is 805, and we're going to use this to wash down our whiskey. It's a new light beer with a simple twist, easy drinking, lime included, built for life. We live across border and imported from California. This one right here is 805. Brian, the reason I have this beer for us is because one of my students actually gave me a couple of these, and that student is connected to movies and cinematography and stuff. So he's a still frame photographer. He's worked all over the place. His name's Zach Popick, and he was the still frame photographer on the whole third season of Doom and a series of other and a series of other movies. So he's a really good photographer. And I was like, hold on, this match is perfect because I have a screenwriter and author tonight. So we'll match this beer to that.
Cool.
All right. Cheers. Ooh, that is good. Wow.
That's a cerveza.
That's got a nice little lime punch to it. So the angels, are they back?
Oh, baby, they're back.
All right.
You know, if you know the book of Daniel, you know Gabriel shows up. And Gabriel, you know, shows up a lot in Daniel's life. So I kind of see him as Daniel's guardian angel for those purposes. So he ends up, he's got a cool story. I'm not going to explain what happens, but basically he does watch over Daniel a little bit, and Uriel and Michael are back. And if people are familiar with my Maccabees story, that was last year. Maccabees actually occurs like 300 years later than Daniel. And in the Maccabees story, you don't really see the angels show up. And one of the reasons why was because the principal theological truth was that God had stopped talking to his people with the last prophet of Malachi. And the book of Maccabees takes place in that time period. So you don't really, the angels don't show up. They're in the background, right? But they don't really show up.
Okay.
But now we're jumping back to Daniel, which is a time period where they're very much a crucial part of the storyline. I get a lot of people who love Uriel, as I do.
I love Uriel.
He's back, baby.
That's
and he and Gabriel are back, you know, competing with each other and having some fun. But this story in Daniel's is Gabriel's more Gabriel's story.
Okay.
Michael will come into the second novel a little bit stronger. Uriel's always in the background. He's always accomplishing their needs because he's just like the little guy that everyone teases, but he ends up, you know, he's like the best fighter. He's the guy who's the most passionate, and he's always there. So
he's feisty.
Yeah, he's feisty. So yeah. And I have again, I don't want to reveal too much, but Daniel's love interest, her name's Ariella, and she happens to be a sensitive, which means a seer. She can see the spiritual world where other people can't. Not all the time, but she often can. So she ends up seeing some of these angels that even Daniel doesn't see. And she's like going, what is this? Right. You know? So, but she ends up kind of having a little bit of a friendship with Uriel, and it's some real fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I look forward to that. Yeah. Uriel, right from the get-go, is kind of a favorite of mine. He has such personality. It's just a poignant personality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, almost every character I draw something from myself, even the bad guys, right? But Uriel, he's like this guy who's small. All the other angels are 6 feet. He's like the normal height of a human, right? And he's blonde haired, but he's kind of like Heath Ledger to me. He's small, blonde haired, and so they're always teasing him for that. But so he overcompensates. He's the best fighter. He uses 2 swords. He's the best fighter. But also he's got a real wit and a real sense of humor, sometimes sarcastic because of that. When you're teased all the time, you can become sarcastic, And so I drew a lot of that from my own life as well, for sure.
That's awesome. True story. I'm the smallest male in my family. So
there you go.
Maybe that's why I like him so much. My brothers are like, good Lord, like 6 foot plus, and they got they're twice as wide as me. And here I am, almost 5'10", and
wow, that's wild.
Yeah. It's like,
but you're the best fighter.
That part is true.
There you go. You're Uriel, baby. Are you sure you have the same mom, or
what? So my brother and I did both do a DNA test, and yeah, we have the same mother and father.
Good.
Yeah, I just got the small genes. Well, that's awesome. So I could see where across your books, Daniel could tie in the prophecies between your Old Testament books and New Testament books. Is any of that at play?
You are a smart man. So anybody who loves Daniel knows there's a lot of prophecy in Daniel. Like I said, this first novel actually doesn't get into the prophecy because that doesn't start till the second part of his life. And I've got 3 parts there, but this one of the reasons why I decided to do this a trilogy too is because I wrote a series on the origin story of the book of Revelation called Chronicles of the Apocalypse.
Yes.
And where most Christians nowadays, when you talk about, Revelation, they automatically assume, oh, we're in the end times and all this kind of stuff. And I don't believe that stuff. But I thought, I'm going to tell this story about the origin of Revelation, when John was writing it and when Nero was persecuting the Christians, and how did the Christians understand it in their day and in their context rather than our modern day context. And actually, I used a lot of Daniel in that story. So I realized that this is kind of like my Daniel trilogy will be the connecting point between my Chronicles of the Watchers and Chronicles of the Nephilim, which are all these Old Testament Bible stories that deal with watchers and giants, etc. Daniel is that transition point, because it's going to have the Old Testament stuff, but it's going to have a lot of that messianic stuff that connects it to the Revelation, the Apocalypse series. And I'm only going to say this, that it will become controversial. Like I said, there's no prophecy yet in the first series, in the first novel, but it will be controversial, but it's going to be so cool that it's going to blow people's minds.
I look forward to that. That's awesome. That's beautiful.
Love controversy.
Yeah.
Makes it more entertaining.
Is it more controversial for evangelicals? Is that what you're saying, Brian?
Yeah, because obviously if you're not, yeah. So the, I mean, the fact is that, right, with what's going on now, and, we're again, every time there's some, geopolitical historical thing going on, like wars basically, and stuff like that. These, the pop prophecy nuts, come out and we're all living prophecy, and this is the fulfillment of prophecy. And I don't believe any of that garbage.
No.
And like you said, that's mostly evangelicals. So your Eastern Orthodox probably, and your Catholics don't tend to believe that kind of stuff. And in fact, that's a connecting point for us, where, a lot of Catholics can connect with a lot of Protestants in this prophecy thing, where those of us who don't believe in the dispensationalism and all that ultra Zionism and all that kind of stuff that's going on. But so that's why I say it's controversial, because everyone, we've got that new push for, we're living prophecy right now, book of Revelation right now,
Yeah,
of course.
It's like, what's so funny is, like, if you even know, like, I know there's different systems, but like the most dominant belief system is like the rapture is going to happen, right? They're going to be raptured out of here. And even atheists know the rapture now, right?
Yes.
And the irony of it is that according to that own system, that's the next sign. There's no signs until the rapture happens. So all these people saying, like, everything that's going on, this is all fulfillment of Bible prophecy. It's not fulfillment of Bible prophecy. By their own system, there's no fulfillment of prophecy until the rapture. The rapture happens, supposed to happen, according to their theory,
Right.
out of nowhere, right? So you can't have any prophecy happen before the rapture, because then it tells you the rapture's near, right? But the rapture's supposed to be any moment, right? So if you look closely at their own system, it's like they're talking about all this stuff like Gog and Magog. Well, look into their system, and you have to understand, within their system, the premillennial system, the Gog and Magog war doesn't happen. Think about this closely. After the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So that's thousands of years away, and they're talking about Gog and Magog now.
Right.
It's ridiculous. It's absurd. So yeah, some of that's going to come in, but of course, my goal is not to be, a propagandist. My goal is to embody my theology into narrative. I do narrative theology. I write theological novels for Bible nerds. No, I have no regret, no shame about that. If you're not a Bible nerd, and, sometimes people think, oh, it's just too much theology in there. I don't care. I'm not doing it to convince anyone. I'm writing the stories that I really love, and I love theology. And there's some cool stuff in the Bible, and I make these connections. But I also come from Hollywood. And if it's not entertainment, if it's not entertaining, I ain't going to write it. So anything I write, even if it's theological, it's got to be entertaining. So I guarantee that no matter what you think about the theology of it, you'll be entertained, whether it's romance, action, adventure, thriller, all that stuff, all those components are part of every scene that I write, because I have that requirement,
So you're literally writing a polemic.
No, that's what I'm saying is I'm actually not. I'm actually not writing a polemic. A polemic is different ways you could define it, but a polemic would be an argument against a viewpoint, right? Or an argument for a viewpoint and against another viewpoint. And my goal, while I do have a viewpoint, all storytelling has a viewpoint, right? But my goal is to tell it in an entertaining way, but also my goal is to write, how can I put it, have multiple perspectives in the story. And so I try to be as faithful and honest to opposing viewpoints. Let's put it that way, right? I suppose you might say, I mean, maybe you could call it somewhat polemical at times if you want to, because the Bible does that, right? The Bible, even the Genesis story is not just a story of creation. They are undermining the Egyptian and Babylonian creation stories as they tell it. And in that sense, you could call it polemical. So yeah, I think there's, in some sense, I'm undermining the typical viewpoint. But my goal is not to say, this is what you should believe, and this is this, and that is that. It's like, because sometimes, like you're mentioning earlier, right? All the Christian art out there, it's didactic. So let's put it that way. Maybe I may be polemical, but I'm subversive. I'm subtle, and I'm not didactic. And I'm not, although some people who are very shallow, they may not appreciate the depth that I go into. So, it's everyone has their own style, and everyone has their own sort of amount of depth or shallowness that they engage in for different issues. I love theme. I love character. I love moral themes. I definitely do love that. So, and I love theology. So I love to explore those different components in all my stories.
Yeah. I love those ideas about diving deeper into storyline, because that's one of the complaints you actually get from a lot of people who go to read the Bible. And it's like, it's so dry, because especially for an English translation, because it misses the nuance of the Greek or the Latin or the Hebrew. And most English translations are very dry. Some aren't, but most are.
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just say, I get a lot of responses from people saying, you've helped me to appreciate the Bible again. It was getting dry to me, and you've made it come alive. I get a lot of the comments, and of course there's going to be, the legalists or the fundamentalists who say, you're not supposed to replace the Bible. You should just have the Bible. You don't need any of this other stuff. That's garbage, and they just they have no imagination. They have no creativity. They don't understand God. They just think everything's literal and scientific. And it's just like, they don't understand the nature of storytelling and how storytelling works, and how when we tell stories, it's a reaffirmation of our beliefs. And so it reaffirms the things we believe, but it brings in some other components outside of that, and we incorporate that. And that's where, just like a pastor preaching a sermon, right? They talk about the Bible, but they bring in a lot of their own stories, don't they?
Yes, they do.
And they bring a lot of other things into their exposition, right? Well, why is it okay for them to do that, but not okay for us to do it in our storytelling? Yeah. So maybe, to be fair, I think most Christians get it, and they do know what I'm doing. So I guess I'm not famous enough to draw a lot of criticism from the fools. So
I think you're getting there rather quickly.
Hopefully I don't get too famous.
I love the expansion of the Godawa verse.
Yes.
It's awesome.
We're up to 17 novels now. I'm going to have 20 total, I think. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
8, 12, plus 5 is 17. So 18, 19, 20, 21 novels total that I know of.
Nice.
The trailer and the intro was awesome.
It was.
My gosh.
Yeah. That was done by my good friend, Justin Sandman. He's actually in South Africa, and he's a creative artist I met years ago. He's done all my AI ads for all my series, Chronicles series. And so, yeah, he did that newest one. Great job.
I'm assuming you're pretty hands-on with all the details of that.
Yeah. Those characters are how my characters look in my novel.
Okay.
So another cool thing, I'm glad you brought this up, because for those who don't know it, I cast characters for all my novels. And you can go to my website and for free, click on any novel, and I'll have a cast of characters tab where you can see most of the characters in the novel. Not all of them, but I've also published them where I add more pictures that you can get if you buy the published books. But you can get most of the characters online for free. And I work with an artist called Cam Harless. He's a brilliant AI guy. I mean, I could do it myself for sure, but I can't afford the time. And Cam gets it, and he's right there with me. He's a genius creative, and I've used him for years because he knows what I'm doing. He's keyed in with me.
Mhm.
And then we work together and I direct him and we get the characters to look like I want. Then I give those characters to Justin and, he'll do the video and make it live. But boy, I know nowadays with what can be done with AI, I could probably do a short movie.
Yeah.
I just don't have the time or energy to learn how to do it right now, but eventually I should.
Yes. Yeah. My gosh, that'd be super cool.
Yeah. And I won't lie, I have played with that and it definitely is time consuming.
Yeah.
Especially getting the characters down right, because there is an art, and it's getting easier now, but there is an art to making sure you retain the characters frame by frame. That's a whole thing. Very cool. Well, Brian, I don't want to hold you up. I know you have to get to dinner.
Well, I've been eating, so I'm good.
Oh, okay, fantastic. Okay, awesome. Okay, is there a small nuance of what you can tell us going into the next book? You've referenced that there is some prophecy. Is there anything that we can leave our listeners?
Well, let's put it this way: the second book will finish up the Nebuchadnezzar story.
Nice.
Of Daniel for sure. And the Nebuchadnezzar is a really interesting character himself. Like he's a little Trumpy. I like Trump, so I don't care what people think, but I like Trump. But Nebuchadnezzar's a little Trumpy and
okay.
He's got an ego. He's got a personality, but of course, if you know the story, he's got quite an interesting character arc, and that will come into the second story for a lot more. And it's going to set up and finish that story before we go into, Cyrus and Persia, which will be later,
Okay. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Cyrus is a fascinating character.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did him right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's just tactically, he is a really fascinating study.
Yeah. Brilliant guy.
I spent an evening doing a deep dive on him, and I was like, man, this guy, he was tactically kind of a genius.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. That whets the appetite.
Well,
Awesome.
Even Nebuchadnezzar was a genius because, he was the son of Nabonidus Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar was his father. He was king, and he sent Nebuchadnezzar out in the field as a general, and Nebuchadnezzar took Carchemish, which was the last Assyrian refuge before Assyria was wiped out. So Assyria had been, the bad guys for hundreds of years. And they had actually wiped out Babylon, but then Babylon comes back with Nabopolassar. But Nebuchadnezzar is the one who leads the army to wipe out the Assyrians finally and for good at Carchemish. That's where my story starts. So I have the Battle of Carchemish in there, and Nebuchadnezzar is the general. And then that's when he finds out, his father dies and he becomes king. But then of course Nebuchadnezzar was what he became known for. And we actually have documents about Nebuchadnezzar as well as his father and a little bit of his of some of his sons afterwards, actual Chaldean accounts that have been, archaeologically discovered. Fascinating. There's a couple of references to the Jews in there. And that is, of course, completely in accordance with the Bible, right? As history always is. Everyone always, the Bible's not true. And then history just keeps confirming it. Okay, come on.
Yep.
Come on, people. Just,
over and over again.
Yeah. But Nebuchadnezzar also became known for building up the glories of Babylon. Like he rebuilt the massive ziggurat complex, which became the Etemenanki complex that had been destroyed, not fully destroyed, but crumbled and decayed because of Assyria. He rebuilt a lot of the buildings, the monuments, his own palace. There's a legend that he built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon for his wife, but that may not be the case. It may be that may be the Library of Nineveh, but nonetheless, tradition and legends have it that he built up that. So I deal a lot with his glory and how he is humbled by God as well. So yeah, people are going to love that.
Awesome. We have actually we touched on a little bit in our previous episode on how the early Christians, touching on your apocalypse, we went to the story of Derinkuyu, the underground city, and how it was the refuge for Christians during that time period. So it's fascinating.
That's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, okay.
I was gonna say, and of course, the Jews in exile is another fascinating, because Jerusalem's been destroyed, the temple's destroyed, Jews are in exile for 70 years, and then they come back. Like a lot of very interesting stuff happens to them. God keeps them in exile, and that's where he has his prophets. Ezekiel is speaking to them during that time period. Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is brought down in Egypt. But my point is just that God's people have had to, of course, the Christians later had their own, the catacombs, and like you mentioned, even the Darren Kuye, I can't remember how you say it, but
yeah, Darren Kuye, yep.
Yeah. So there are different ways that the Jews also had to survive while in Babylon, and fascinating stories.
Yeah. Awesome. So you're bringing up, so are there references or even interactions with the other prophets inside these new books?
Yes, that was one of the things that I wanted. I had never really studied the exile. I know it's so important and crucial. I know a little bit about it, but I'd always been confused by okay, so what are the prophets? There's multiple prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. Isaiah was earlier. Okay. He was about the Assyrian exile, but he also prophesied the Babylonian, right? So I never understood how those fit. And of course, if you ever read the books, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Jeremiah particularly, it's like way out of context. There's some contextual stories, but a lot of it's out of context, and it's not chronological, so it's very confusing. And you get your generic, God's condemning and stop being unfaithful, but it's like where does this apply, right? And so by studying that, it helped me to place Jeremiah, and I actually incorporate Jeremiah into the first Daniel novel, because he is the prophet who is prophesying the fall of Jerusalem when Daniel is taken into exile. And it's interesting that Daniel wasn't considered a prophet, actually, although he's included in the prophets later. On the surface, he wasn't considered a prophet, because think about it, he just interpreted dreams and stuff for the king, right? And it wasn't until later that he actually had some more of the prophetic visions, right? But yeah, so I've always wondered, how do those play and how do they come in together? So I do incorporate that. So you're going to see Jeremiah in the first, and I bounce back and forth between Babylon and Israel, Jerusalem. So you see what's going on in that time period. And then the second novel, we're going to get into Ezekiel, because Ezekiel gets commissioned in Babylon once they get to Babylon. So yeah, it's going to be some fascinating. I'm going to bring in lots of stuff from the Bible. So it's not just the story of Daniel, but the story of Daniel in the exile.
Fantastic. So that adds a whole layer of context to it. That's really cool. I look forward to that, because like you said, when you go through, and that's when I was an early Christian, when I was young, it's like you're trying to place all this stuff on a map, and you're like, oh, so we have one prophet over here, one prophet over there. What are the time frames? Where do they fit?
Yeah. It's just, and then you read them, and it's hard to understand. Well, when was this? Because there's lots of prophecies, and they're all connected to historical things that are going on. So yeah. So I try to make some sense in that. And when you read my novels, you're going to get a better sense of the bigger picture and how they all work together.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's going to be a good eye opener for, this generation of Christians who struggled like I did, where they're trying to fit these pieces together. Because when you first read through the Bible, like let's say you do the Bible in a year, right? And so you read through it and you're like, okay, that was fascinating, but where's the pieces? It's like a puzzle. Where do these go together? What's the context? What are the times? So I could definitely see this novel series being great, especially this new trilogy being great for fitting those together.
Yes, and that's my goal, because that's what I want to do. You know what I mean? Like I use the storytelling to help it make sense for me. And so therefore it'll help other people make sense for other people as well. Oh, the coughing's starting to happen, guys.
Okay.
Time to wrap it up.
All right,
man. No problem.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate you being on, and I really look forward to reading through the book. And before we leave, I do have a question. Will there be an audio version?
Yeah, I'm finishing it up right now. Believe it or not, even though I'm coughing my head off now, it should be done in a couple of weeks. So
awesome.
It'll be up on Audible. If a good time to say, if you're signed into my website, Godawa.com, sign up for my email, my newsletter, whatever. I don't send too many emails, but you will be the first to know when the Audible version is available, which will be a few weeks.
Fantastic.
And any other cool articles free articles that I'll put up, you get it by signing in on my Godawa.com website.
And then one more question. Would there be a companion study book?
Thank you. Yes, there is. It's not going to come out till the end of the next novel because it's research for 3 novels. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
it'll come out with the next novel for sure. And people are going to love it. It's got all the usual deep Bible study, historical stuff that you're going to love.
Excellent. Because I treasure every one of those. Yeah. They're
cool.
Just for all of our listeners out there, the books are amazing, but his research stuff, if you really love historical research and digging deep into the Bible and history.
Yeah, you got to be a Bible nerd.
You got to be a Bible nerd.
Yeah. His research stuff is phenomenal. If you haven't grabbed them yet, just grab them. They're just fantastic.
And there will also be a character book, a character picture book by when I get the last novel out, where you'll have characters for all 3 novels, Daniel at all his different ages and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be really cool. That'll be available. It'll all come out with the 3rd book for that one. So.
Okay. Oh man. Okay. So I'm really looking forward to that. And
in the meantime, you get the free cast of characters on the website, Godawa.com. Just go to the book that you want to see and you'll get the free cast of characters anyway. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. That's fantastic. Yep. I look forward to that. I have Audible credits waiting. So, Gumby, any last words?
Oh, man, Brian, appreciate you, man. Appreciate your research and all your work. And we are thankful for your time that you gave us, brother.
Thank you for having me on, guys.
Yeah. Don't forget to check us out, BibleOverBrews.com. And we are on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, you name it, we are there. Good fight, good night, Godspeed.
Peace out.
What if the gods of ancient Babylon were not myths, but fallen angels? You know the Bible story of Daniel, a faith empires cannot break, but you've never experienced it like this. The Daniel Trilogy by best-selling author Brian Godawa, part of the Chronicles of the Watchers, a series of supernatural biblical novels charting the influence of spiritual warfare on human history. Jezebel, Moses, Judah Maccabee, and now the Daniel Trilogy. The first novel, Daniel, Exile in Babylon, available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook at Amazon.com. Chronicles of the Watchers by Brian Godawa at Amazon.com.